by Karnivool.
There we go. Selected by Sam. Um, you were just explaining to me, sort of, your past. So why don't you give us a little background?
Yeah. This is both this and their kind of first album, Demata, are music that I've listened to a lot over the years. Just because there's a lot about what there's just a lot about what they're doing that I like a great deal. It's been funny going back and paying a little closer attention than I've sort of conditioned myself to, and realizing like noticing some of the spots where easily the biggest standout to me is like it's interesting how sometimes the like kind of like lightness and more like relationship centered lyrics contrast the tonal, their whole timbral and like harmonic setup.
Right.
That's a dissonance that I never really noticed before, because I've only as a result of joining music club ever really given that much attention to lyric. But I actually started listening to them as a result of kind of a funny story. My dad saw them playing in a bar here,
Ooh.
like a tiny bar.
Yeah.
They went on to some amount, reasonable in the metal scene at this point, although they haven't released an album for 6 years as Carnival. Turns out the lead singer has really active, and the bassist has a pedal through Dark Glass, which is also kind of what actually put them back on my mind, because put them weirdly what reminded me that I should put them in the rotation. Sitting around trying to work out a good bass tone, thinking about bass tones that I liked, and then discovering that the bassist for Carnival had actually made a custom pedal with like a dual distortion that you can blend between. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, because to segue straight into commentary, the bass tone throughout this is so fucking good.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so like, it's so distorted and chuggy and still audible, which getting that amount of bite in bass is so goddamn hard. And getting that and then getting it to sit well in a mix, even harder. Kudos to their engineer.
For sure, yeah. It can easily overpower everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it comes through clearly and aggression, but does not drown anything out. And that, to me, is a really integral part of their sound, in terms of making it as fucking heavy as it is.
Right. Right, absolutely. Yeah, without the bass, it would... I don't know, I think that is part of what sets their music apart at all. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, in terms of vocal tone and guitar tone and, like, rhythmic structure and stuff like that, they're not that different from some other bands that, are in the same genre. But yeah, I think the bass is particularly what stands out.
Yeah, their bassist and their drummer, I think, are easily the most, like, yeah, easily the most notable in terms of the sheer, like, kind of idiosyncratic quality of their performances. And admittedly, the drummer's really fucking tight. But yeah, even he's got a pretty clear artistic debt to people like Danny Carey and
Yeah.
only one that comes to mind.
It definitely makes the music a little more rhythmic, a little more... How do I describe this? This isn't necessarily music that you're gonna put on so that you can, like, sing along to it and, be like, ah! Like, it's just... it's sort of the opposite of that, right? Is you kind of put it on and you're just listening to it and you're kind of bobbing your head like this, and then you know what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely has that quality, which you know for the genre makes sense. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, even when they're going for stuff that's meant to sound a little more anthemic in terms of the way it's structured, it's still largely to deliver a pretty personal, usually a pretty personal message. And when they're going for more of an anthemic kind of sound, that's actually where the lyricism starts to like seem a little weak sometimes. Because I'll say like something like "Set Fire to the Hive," I fucking love everything about that track in terms of what's going on instrumentally, and even the vocal performance is excellent in terms of just how he's saying the lines. But like, it's this kind of sketching of an apocalyptic vision and sketching of like an idea of what resisting, you know, resisting some nebulous machine is going to be. But there's not a lot of really depthy analysis going on, which is hard to do in a song, but you can sort of tell. I guess you can sort of tell where there's more revolution aesthetic than there is like genuine
yeah.
revolutionary intent sometimes. And I love these guys, but it seems like they're still kind of developing sort of a mindset there. I think we've talked about them independently from this quite a bit, and I've been misinformed this entire time because I've thought that 2013 or 14's Asymmetry, which was the final output from these guys, I think Sound Awake was probably their high point as far as I'm concerned. Themada's awesome. I love a lot of those tracks, but Sound Awake, every track has something cool going on.
Right.
And they have noticeably matured as artists. Like a lot of the melodrama and kind of teen angstiness on Themada has been sort of subdued. Not completely, but
yeah,
it feels much more like a mature offering than Themada does, which is kind of why I hemmed and hawed, because there are a lot of really awesome tracks of Themada. But
yeah.
Asymmetry, I guess they must have recorded after like a year and a half of consecutive touring, and the singer's voice was pretty noticeably weak on it. And I just sort of heard that and concluded, like, fuck, the guy's burnt himself out. Turns out I was wrong. He's joined a project called Birds of Tokyo, which continues to release like pop rock, like
Really?
country inflected pop rock.
Really? That's weird. I didn't know that.
It's
but...
not. It's not better in my estimation, but yeah, like they came out with an album last year, and it's like all like it's written like fucking country, like really simple vocal melody lines, you know, delivered in basically the same voice he's using here, less vocal distortion, obviously.
Yeah,
but
not as
he's always had kind of notably, particularly on Sound Awake, he had pretty notably clean vocals for the genre.
Yeah. That mostly it's just like they wanted it to sound. It's like got a very specific type of reverb where it kind of sounds large, but not in your face, sort of a little further back in the mix. So it's yeah.
But yeah, doing like pop rock now, it's so fucking weird.
Yeah, that is weird. Honestly, I haven't heard the music, maybe it's fine, but from just listening to this, that sounds not like what I would suggest. I don't know, for the vocal stylings.
To me, I went into it and just was immediately understood, because it's like it still sounds noticeably like him, and I'm just suddenly like, all right, not my favorite part of Carnival.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which is, he's the front man and he brought them all together, so it feels bad to say that, but a lot of, if I'm remembering correctly, a lot of Carnival's tracks were actually written by the drummer,
Mm.
And kind of passed off to.
That's
At least the instrumental parts. I think Ian Kenny's handled the lyrics the whole time. But
yeah, it kind of makes sense for the way that the sort of the tracks are written. Like I said, a little more like melodic.
yeah, one thing I do really enjoy about them that again I prior to listening through this week I wouldn't really have been able to articulate is just the fact that there's always like this music is composed with a sense of directionality at basically every point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the melody lines evolve and change subtly with each repetition,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll lead really well into next segments. You know, or bring in elements in small ways and then bring them in much louder and more distorted or more present in the mix, right? They'll like kind of suck some of the tone out of them and play them as this small back ornamentation to get your ear ready for it.
Right.
But there's a lot of intentionality and directionality to the music that is really cool to me. The fact that they frequently use, they use doubling, passing vocal lines off to different instruments all throughout. Again, it's very common technique, but it's really not something we hear, not something I'm used to hearing that much in metal. And in general, I'm not used to hearing. I think we've gotten to such a kind of like gradually evolving loop-centric place in music where like we have an established sense of like what moves a track forward, and it's largely just time. So it's like it's been 4 bars, so we introduce a new element now, or 8 bars or 12 bars or what have you, right?
Right.
And we just kind of layer stuff on or take stuff out. But there's so much intentionality and again that directionality occurring here. Each line is actually, it's usually, even when they do have a repeating riff in the background, whatever's in the lead will be like leading a melody and leading kind of the narrative and arc of the song forward. Which to me is just really cool. There's just lots of tiny little ornamentation and evolution. And again, I think part of it is just, I think to a certain extent, it's not always with like so much a cohesive vision in mind as it just is a really good sense of how to lead through, how to weave a thread through a song. But either way, to me, it always strikes me as really tightly and efficiently composed, despite the fact that you've got some tracks that go like 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10, 12. I thought it was funny because I was listening to it this morning and I was like, oh, there are only 3 tracks left. Oh, that's half the album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did feel a little bad picking the hour and 17-minute one, but it's the better of the kind of 2 albums I would have considered for them. So
Sure, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree that it definitely feels like intentionality, like you said, and like there's not a lot of things that like catch you off guard or like surprise you. Like it's very much so like a flow from one thing to another. Like definitely like a build up from point A to point B in a song as opposed to A and B, which I would say definitely gives it points towards listenability, especially in terms of metal music. I know that metal is one of those genres where a lot of people either like it or they don't, and there's not a lot of middle ground. But I think that this could be sort of, middle ground, sort of just because of the way it's composed.
Yeah.
because
And yet it still manages to have a lot of what's really, yeah, at least to me, what's really satisfying about metal. It's
absolutely,
just
yeah.
sheer like heavy, heavy, distorted riffs, like giant guitar soundscapes, like
Absolutely.
total wall of noise type stuff. But it's well controlled enough noise that it manages to be enveloping without being harsh, which is really impressive with walls of distorted guitar.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's not very, there's not a lot of bite to it, despite how heavy it is. Um, it's not music that wants to hurt you, like a lot of um, metal is. It's less like I'm gonna fuck you up, and more like sad melancholy, just this deep, heavy weight, right?
yeah.
Which, yeah, I mean, points for artistic intent, I guess. Um, and not just, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's good. It's very tight too. It's very, all the tones, everything really blends together pretty well. Um, which, like, the only negative to that I could say is, like, it would be easy to listen to it and sort of, like, zone out if you wanted to, right? And just kind of, like, have the music playing.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, like, very, like, active music, right? It's not like, I'll take another band from the same genre of progressive metal, like Dream Theater, right? Where it's very much so like, oh, and you're,
Yeah.
you're doing this and you're doing that and you're fucking, yeah, it's a little more passive. It's a little more, sedated, but that's not really the right word. Though, I don't know. I guess if you're, like, taking ketamine or something, this would be good music to listen to. So, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it definitely, it just even looking at the album art, I think it's definitely meant to encompass it's meant to capture kind of the feeling of the void, which isn't necessarily an active threat so much as it is a looming passive one, right? It's by its sheer presence and enormity that it is threatening. It's not, it never goes out of its way to announce itself.
Yeah.
And sonically, I think that ability to be background noise, even though there's still plenty going on within it, serves that intent rather well.
I just thought of a good...
Again, it's music with a really strong sense of space, which I've realized in general is just something that I tend to appreciate.
I just thought of a good way to describe the band to someone who'd never heard it before. It's like Tool, except instead of if they did a lot of acid, they did a lot of ketamine. That's...
Yeah. I believe that the two primary influences they've cited are Tool and Deftones, which feels like a pretty... It feels like that's a pretty adequate, pretty apt description of the space they're inhabiting.
Yeah.
That same... Because I realized, and it's... Yeah. Nice finally to have trained my ears well enough to go like, okay, what is it that they really have in common with Deftones? And it's a lot of really cool dissonances and just interesting chord voicings, but it's also like huge melodic leaps and huge intervallic distances to create that really strong sense of like downward or upward motion. Which, yeah, is again hard to pull off without seeming melodramatic, but
Absolutely. Absolutely. So props to them for not being melodramatic, when they easily could have been.
Yeah. And were a little bit on their first album, as much as I love it.
Right. And it's not to say that this specific album doesn't have, like, angst, because it definitely does. There's definitely a level of angst, and I could definitely understand why Teenage Sam liked this a lot. You know what I'm saying? Because there definitely is sort of a relatability and angstiness to it.
Yeah, the kind of all-pervading sense of unease.
Mm-hmm. Like, I don't remember there's one of the songs that's like, hit me with a bottle over my head or something like that.
Yeah,
you know
wake
saying?
me with a bottle across the head. Yeah, it's one of
Yeah.
the most memorable lines for me too. It's just a really powerful image.
Yeah, and it's also
Yeah.
angsty.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of their lyrics are sort of, definitely in service of the actual tone of the music. Not necessarily all as memorable as that. But definitely towards that tone. Definitely, and I don't know. There were some moments where I'd have to go back and look at every single song and break down all the lyrics. But there were definitely some moments where I was like, these lyrics kind of suck. And then there were other moments where I was like, oh, these are pretty good. So, like, I don't know. I think just lyrically, kind of middling. Not a lot of, like, grand literary moments, right? Not a lot of, like, clever lyrics or anything. Just very expressive. And they definitely do their job and serve the music well.
Yeah, but they are not the reason. They're certainly not the reason I would listen to the music.
Right.
If you transplanted these lyrics to another context, they would not they would not be enough to keep me listening.
No. No. Yeah, like if you had these lyrics with a more mediocre playing and tone and stuff, then I would be unimpressed with the music.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see, what else is there? Do you have any of the songs on this album that you, like, really like?
I do. I love the ending track, which I think it's Change.
Change, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. I was gonna say that one's probably the one I like the most, too.
Yeah, Change, and Set Fire to the Hive is just those fucking bee-like noises that they're all playing. It's just got such fucking fantastic energy, and again, that the fact that union of imagery and sound is really, really cool to see, and it's just got such a fucking good breakdown. Just such a track, which it's one of the ones that got a music video, and I understand why. But
yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there's lots of bee
Yeah.
imagery in the music video.
yeah,
Yeah. I was gonna say that I think the last track is the one I enjoyed the most. I couldn't give ratings to every single track, but I will say some of the tracks I just spaced out during. I think not all of them are as impressive or as re-listenable.
Yep.
Like, there's nothing... Like, I'll say this. There was never one point in the entire album where I was like, oh, I don't like this, or, oh, like, this is offensive to my ears, or, oh, like, this sounds bad. There were just forgettable moments, I think. Just unimpressive, forgettable, just sort of filler moments in the album.
Yeah. For me, it's usually there are a decent number of points where it feels like they're kind of restating ideas that they've already stated better elsewhere in the album. I think they still work, and they're good enough tracks that I would still like enjoy the music listening to it and avoid. But contrasted against some of the higher points on the album, they're definitely noticeably less interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, uninteresting is a good way to put it, is, because listening to this album all the way through, yeah, like, in one sitting, and I mean, it is a bit of a longer album, it's by no means the longest album I've ever heard, but, you know, an hour and 20 minutes is, twice as long as a lot of other albums, you know, a lot of other things that we've even listened to here is a lot of 45-minute albums and stuff like that. So I think, you know, in the grand scheme of the void that they are conjuring, I think a lot of it gets lost, just floating out in space in the hour and 20 minutes that they have. Could they cut it down? Yes. Do they need to? I don't think so. I think, you know, that's sort of the kind of band that they are, is a little bit more long-winded. Yeah, I'm not complaining about the length by any means. If they added another even 10, 20 minutes on it, I probably would. What was the Tool album that came out this year? Wasn't it like an hour 30, an hour, like, it was long. Maybe it was, I don't know.
Yeah, it was Fear Inoculum. I still haven't listened to it.
Oh, yeah. We'll have to do that one eventually. Oh, that was 2019.
Yeah, 2019.
Oh. Yeah, an hour 26 minutes. That album was too long. But
too long in coming, and still managed to overstay its welcome.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not gonna dive into criticism of that album now, but I will say that it was a little disappointing. But then again, I think that this type of music I liked more when I was younger. And not to say I don't like it now, I just don't get excited by it now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I do like it. I would definitely rather listen to Karnivool over a lot of music. But yeah, it's not something where I'm like, fuck yeah, it's time to... You know, it's just... I don't know. Maybe...
Yeah. To me, it's useful to go back, and because I think it's mostly because this stuff really informed at least my own sense of how you could go about expressing certain ideas. So it's been useful and exciting to listen to for me, mostly because I can I'm finally at a point of having trained my ears well enough that I can sort of start to reverse engineer the things that are working, and again, think about things that I, if I were to go and use some of these ideas, things that I'd like to improve, or ways I could improve, things that I would change in the service of better expressing stuff in my own voice. So for me, it's exciting purely in the sense that it's like, that's a sound that sounds like something in my head,
Right.
How did they do that?
Right.
But yeah, there's definitely less of there's not as much of the like, fuck yeah, this is the best music ever.
Right.
Although I do still think, you could do worse.
Oh, absolutely.
For like, if you had to hand somebody one album, you could do a lot better too. But
yeah,
there's still a lot of cool ideas.
Yeah.
I do like the use of didgeridoo.
Yeah.
and kind of neat little percussion elements. I think the opening track, starting with the little vibraphone sounding thing, you know, descending into that fucking incredibly heavy riff, is just a cool moment.
Yeah. I think the additional instrumentation is a lot of what puts them in the progressive metal category. Because they sort of lack some things that you would consider like the first things that you would think of when you think of progressive metal. Things like crazy solos and, you know, stuff like that. Which they do have, you know, moments where the guitar is really highly featured, and they do have some intricate lines, but it's not like, they're not as showy. You know, it's not like in contrast to Dream Theater, once again, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like that at all. Like, it's sort of the exact polar opposite side.
And that actually dovetails really well. That sense of, like, kind of rolling off the showiness a little bit. Because I realized, there aren't that many, like, guitar solo moments in this. And I realized as I was listening to it, I remembered the comment that I had made about the fucking roller coaster simulator soundtrack guitar tone, right? And they use it, but there's a tiny change, which I can tell what they've probably done is rolled off the tone knob. So a lot of the high end isn't as harsh.
Yeah.
So it's more of like a glassy Stratocaster sound running through some distortion and adding some harmonic richness. And I'm like, this is the version of this that I like. There's a little less high end. It's not screaming and wailing as much, so it feels less like it's, you know, imitating the guitarist of a previous, you know, a couple previous decades.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a more subdued take on that, and I think that pulling back from excessive theatricality is reflected in that rolling off the tone knob, because it's like, we don't need this to be screaming and harsh, right? We can let it sound a little glassy and still distorted, and it'll work. It'll convey the idea well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
yeah.
It was definitely a moment of me going like, this is the same, some of the same basic ingredients as the roller coaster simulator guitar tone that I don't like, but why is it a little better here?
Right.
And it's just rolling back the tone knob.
Yeah. I think that
probably
I'm struggling to remember the name of that album. Fucking Quiet World. I think that that's a good comparison, because I think that, I mean, artistic intent obviously was very different with these two albums, but, like, the ingredients are very similar. Sort of the background, and I don't mean the individual people. I mean sort of the music, right? Of the genre, right? They're considered the same genre. Is very similar, but the execution is just so different. And even some of the themes are pretty similar.
But betrayal in relationships and
and like loneliness and angst and yeah, absolutely.
And I think, you know, a lot of the comments that I made about that album were just that it was the sort of thing where I'm like, a little more time in the oven for these guys, for them to get a little more confident in their own voices, right? And that totally happened with Carnival as well. As I've said, their first album was noticeably more melodramatic, right?
Right.
In a way that, like, kind of bad stage acting can be, right? And that's fucking what melodramatic means, essentially. But just that it was like, this is somebody expressing a kind of like a performative version of a human experience in a way that you can detect as being performance rather than like authentic disclosure.
Right.
And it's something it's something we're all guilty of whenever we're trying to express something we're not totally confident in and not totally comfortable expressing yet, right? We'll use the kind of veneer of performativity to make it easier, but you can detect it, and it can make things feel a little less genuine at times. And Carnival, as you know, a couple years went on from the release of Themata, matured a bit. So I think, you know, I would love to hear the next offering from the guys who did A Quiet World for the same reason. And again, like as with Carnival, like that first album had a lot of really cool stuff going on.
Right.
So I think, yeah, I'm glad we listened to them close together.
Yeah. We'll see if what's the name of the band? If they release anything. I mean, between let's see, there was 5 years between Carnival's first and second albums, so like, or at least between their first album and the one we just listened to. So like, you know, sometimes when you think a band is dead, they will come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes, you know, like Tool, it's kind of maybe better if they don't, but, not to say the album was bad. It wasn't bad, it was just...
It's just not worth, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and it just wasn't, mind-blowing.
Did not justify the hype, which I realized that, you know, they ran into the fucking Half-Life 3 problem, right?
Right.
Where past a certain point, people's expectations just get so goddamn high.
Right.
That I believe the quote is, it could come with a free blowjob, and it still wouldn't be enough, right?
Yeah. And that's sort of another problem with progressive metal fans. I think that bands, especially Tool, have gotten a bad rap because people are like, this is the deepest, most intense music that ever was created. Oh, listen to this. They made a song that it's so hard to play and this and that. And then when you do listen to it, and you've already heard all this stuff, and you've already been hyped up so much, you're like, oh, this is what you're talking about? And, like, deconstructing it, you're like, wow, this is great, this is cool, once you've heard it, and then you deconstruct it. But, like, if you have all the good stuff already in your mind before going into it, it's not going to live up to that expectation. So I think that's why bands, especially Tool, I think Tool is one of the number one annoying fan fucking bands that are good, but their fans, you know, their fans are what drive people away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Carnival's not like that.
Yeah. And it is worth noting that, you know, I realize I spoke ill of Birds of Tokyo, but they've topped the Australian charts multiple times, so...
Who cares about what those Aussies think?
I know, but I feel like I have to, you know... I don't, you know, on the very, very small chance that Ian Kenny sees this, I'm glad that you're still working.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you've moved. I'm glad that you're, you know, expressing stuff that's more personal to you. It's weird hearing you sing like country melodies.
Yeah.
What would sound like American country, like very simple, you know. And some, you know, I get some human experiences are best stated in simple terms, but it's just weird.
Yeah, I'll have to listen to it before I pass any judgment.
Yeah. From what I can tell, like, this latest album is the most like that.
Right.
If you listen to the one that has covers of them all in like all black, it sounds like there's a little more bite and edge there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm planning on going and listening to it. But this most recent one, at least going through it, I was like, Jesus Christ. It's all like art rock. Not even art rock, just like, you know. pop rock.
I love to see the pop to metal or metal to pop conversion. It is one of the most weird like
Yep.
three, because there are artists that do that. The one that comes into my mind right now is Poppy, who was complete like art pop whatever when she was working with her old producer, and then just now is just completely metal and is like completely different from what it was before.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I like the pop to metal conversion. The metal to pop conversion, I think people hate.
Yeah. 'Cause, like, yeah, I'll have to go in deeper on the goddamn Birds of Tokyo stuff, but it sounded kind of like it was the sort of thing where it's like, yes, a metal singer, the frontman for a formerly pretty edgy metal project, has found God and a family and is now making pop music.
Yeah, God'll do it.
Yeah, God ruins all music, guys.
No, that's not true. Okay, God ruins. Okay,
God ruins heavy music.
When you take music and then you insert God, it's not great, right? When you take an already previously established genre that already has its own identity and then you try to put a sticker that's God on top of it, Christian rock, Christian rap, all this kind of stuff, it sucks.
Yeah.
But when you create your music from the get-go with your own religious
There's
themes
a lot
in
of good
mind,
religious music.
there's lots of amazing music, and some of the foundations of modern Western music are all religious, and I love choral music. I love,
Yeah.
So
No, and a lot of that stuff a lot of those ideas are full on borrowed by contemporary music, in service to a more nihilistic, less theist worldview, specifically because it evokes those ideas so well and also sounds good. Yeah,
Right.
I do not mean to be knocking religious music. I'm mostly joking that it just seems like when metal frontmen find God, it's just doesn't end well.
yeah, that's true. That's
Their
true.
creative output is not as good.
Specifically, metal frontmen that find God are almost always obnoxious once they do. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say to that. There are some, I will say, there are some good Christian hardcore bands. But those bands were Christian from the start, and stayed Christian. They didn't find God halfway through and then change their whole personality.
Yep. Yeah, that's no born again shit.
Yeah. 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 What time was it? We can a little more until we do ratings. We did 2 albums in a row of our youths, from our teenage years, which means the next album that I have to put has to be an album from my teenage years, and I'm really thinking about it. As to what I'm going to do, because I have a couple good ones in mind. I don't know. Yeah, I suppose we could do ratings now. I don't really have any more notes. Go ahead.
I think one final note going into it is just realizing what I didn't speak to. I've kind of alluded to the fact that this is a just ridiculously well mixed album, at least to my ears. And there's a lot of just cool little pieces of sound design all throughout, like controlling feedback and these weird, these kind of pulsing, waves of distorted like noise floors or like 60 cycle hums. I'm not even sure what they're using a lot of the time as the original sound source, but just a lot of cool touches, having little novel sound sources that evoke that feeling of like static and descending kind of finding yourself translated into the ether as you move through that barrier of noise. My sound designer ears were perking up and pretty pleased on multiple occasions. They do use the like various kind of like feedback or hum trick, probably more than is polite, but they use different versions of it every time, so I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, good sound design. That is definitely true. Very intentional sound design. It's not just like, look what we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's do ratings.
Yep.
Listenability, I would give it an 8. I think it's very listenable to the point where it can be background music accidentally if you if you're not, paying attention. Which is both a plus and a minus. That is both a good and a bad thing.
Yep.
Musicianship. I mean, there certainly wasn't any bad or negative aspects to the musicianship. I wasn't blown away. And not even because they didn't have, like, solos or whatever. I just, I was like, oh, these guys are good. But that's sort of where that ended. So I think I'll go with a 7.5. Listenability, musicianship, album cohesion, pretty good. I don't know. I definitely just could listen to the whole thing in one sitting, which I think says a lot. There was never any big changes. There was never any, anything that threw me off. So I'm going to put the cohesion pretty high. 8.5. And then, what's the last one? Weird factor.
Weird factor.
That's tough. As it usually is, for things that aren't, like, either, oh my god, this is so fucking weird, or this is the most normal, boring thing I've ever heard. And I gotta put it somewhere, I definitely gotta put it somewhere in the middle there. I'm gonna give it a 6. I don't think it's that weird. I think that it's weirder than normal music, but it's not, there's nothing that's super off-putting or, I suppose, unique, but not really. Like, everything else that you hear in this music has a place and is done at least somewhere else. It may not be done as well or in the same way, but, like, you could swap it out for something and it wouldn't fuck up the music that much. So that's mine.
Yeah. I'm going to agree with listenability at an 8. I do think it's the sort of thing that, like, I can just put it on and let it play, and I can switch between passive and active listening throughout the duration of the runtime and be happy either way.
Mm-hmm.
Which, honestly, when I think about it, that honestly there are a couple of points where if you were to switch to active listening, it's like, okay, there's not a ton going on here that they haven't already done better elsewhere on the album. So I'll keep it at an 8. Musicianship, I actually have to give it a pretty goddamn high rating. I agree that there's nothing super showy, but they are so frequently using weird meters. Like, there's not a lot of music that I have, even when they intentionally use either polymeter or polyrhythm.
Mm-hmm.
I usually don't have trouble like counting along and figuring out what they're doing, but there are a lot of moments here where I sit and I try to figure out how they're counting it, and it's like it works, and I could play along to it in my head, but like figuring out what's going on, you know, if you were to hand me the sheet, I would not be able to necessarily transcribe it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they use a lot of those like off-kilter grooves so seamlessly is again, to me, a testament to their overall musicianship.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general there was actually some more impressive guitar work on Themata, their initial offering. It's generally more subdued here, more constrained by the needs of the album than like the any desire for virtuosity on the part of the guitarist necessarily, but it's all really tight, and the drummer's fucking tearing it up.
Mm-hmm.
And again, playing the fact that they're able to stay in sync and still convey a really strong sense of pulse that you can headbang to, despite the fact that they have these like jagged lurching rhythms at times, again, to me, shows they're just really goddamn tight and well rehearsed, and also really good at incredibly talented songwriters to get those fairly difficult to play rhythms sounding completely natural. I think it's understated but really impressive. Even if it is the sort of thing that's like, you know, once you get to like college level jazz bands, like that kind of internal timekeeping is what's expected. We don't hear it in a lot of music. And these guys, again, started to form as a band playing like Nirvana covers. So they don't have that background, and they still just rock solid sense of rhythm, and ability to stay locked in with one another. So for me, that puts musicianship at like an 8. I do think the vocals are not as much to write home about, but they serve the needs of the project really well, and so I won't really deduct any points, because I do not think another vocalist would have been better. I actually think he works pretty perfectly for their sound.
That makes sense.
Cohesion, I'll put it like a 7.5 or an 8. I'm just nothing but 8s today. Because I think, in that none of the transitions are super jarring, and there are multiple moments where there is a seamless transition from one song into the next, where like a note will be fading out, a note or some feedback will be fading out in one track, and then swell back up into the next. So they are constructed to flow together pretty well. I'll knock it down to a 7 point. Probably a 7, purely because, despite the fact that as a piece of music, you know, compositionally they all sit together well, the ideas being discussed they just kind of move, and maybe I'm just not paying close enough attention, but they don't really feel like they're telling a coherent story, right? There's a bunch of different ideas and outlooks being expressed, and the oral arc is very tangible. You can feel in the way it's composed,
Right.
that it sits and feels like one piece of music, but lyrically it's kind of meandering. I'll actually knock it down to a 7. And lastly, Weird Factor, I'm right with you. I'll put it a 6, because I think you could turn on their music and it would sound like them to me. I think they
Right.
found their own unique combination of elements, but the elements are all familiar. And have been used in other ways in other projects, but they do still have their own sound. So yeah, I'll put it at a 6, just above average, because they do sound like them, but they're not. But it's because of the way they've combined existing ideas. Although that bass tone is pretty unique to them. I think that's kind of, or it was at least in 2010. It's been, I think a lot of people heard it, and maybe he's stealing it from elsewhere. I don't know, but
Who knows?
it's been imitated in a lot of Jet projects now because it's fucking super goddamn tasty, but also very, very hard to correctly.
Right.
So yeah, that's it for my broken apart rating. I guess I can do overall before you do yours.
Yeah, do overall.
Yeah, this overall it is an 8.5 for me, which again makes it greater than the sum of its parts in a lot of different ways. I think part of that's attributable to the fact that we don't really have a category for sound design as such, and I think there's just as a set of ideas and as a place to inhabit. It's so well constructed.
Mm-hmm.
That I have to have a great deal of respect for it. There's a lot worth paying attention to compositionally, at least for me.
Right.
There are some rough edges. There are some perhaps unnecessary ornaments. It is not perfect by any means, but there is a lot worth paying attention to going on. And I feel like I learned a lot just by going in and paying much closer attention to this album. Despite having listened to it for years. So yeah, 8.5.
All right. Yeah, I think I'll give it a 7.5. I liked it. I obviously don't have the same nostalgia or amount of time listened to be able to appreciate it as you do. I think if I listened to it more, the number would go up. But just based on my overall enjoyment from just listening to it this week, 7.5. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, that's going to be it for this week. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all the things. Follow on Twitch so I can get... not Twitch partner, but the other one.
Affiliate?
Affiliate, yes. So I can actually make money so that people can tip me and shit like that. Follow on socials. Let us know what you think about this album. Let us know what you think we should listen to. Feel free to tell me that I'm an idiot and all my opinions are wrong. And we'll see you next week.
Let me know how poorly I've misjudged Ian Kenny for moving on.
Yeah, tell us that his
I'm just a
current
giant
project,
hipster who can't accept change.
right, his current project is so good. It's so brilliant. And we're just completely wrong and stupid. Feel free to let us know in the comments.
Next week, I may have to have a mea culpa moment because I am planning on diving into that stuff just kind of on my own time. So maybe I'll be back next week and be like, just so we're clear, I listened to Birds of Tokyo. I rescind my previous statements.
There you go. Have a nice week. Have a nice day. Have a nice life. keep listening to music, keep being cool, and keep fucking. Or not. If you're asexual, don't fuck. That's cool too. Adios.